Canada's attempt to lower tensions this Thursday night. 2 cabinet ministers and Ontario's premier are in America's capital.
We want a constructive meeting.
Canada only works as a state.
The threats Trump repeated about NATO members in front of the head of NATO. A BC woman detained by U.S. immigration.
This may take months for her to get out of custody.
Why she was arrested and the inhumane conditions she says she's endured. And hoping for a homecoming, the mission to bring 2 astronauts back to Earth after a prolonged delay.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Tariffs are at the top of the news again. Ontario's premier has made another trip to Washington along with 2 federal cabinet ministers after the U.S. Commerce Secretary appeared to offer Canada an olive branch. The hope was to lower the temperature of the escalating trade war. But while meeting NATO's Secretary General today, President Trump said he has not changed his mind, nor has he changed his tone.
And to be honest with you, Canada only works as a state. It doesn't. We don't need anything they have. It's so perfect as a great and cherished state. Keeping "O Canada," the national anthem. I love it. I think it's great. Keep it. But it'll be for the state, one of our greatest states, maybe our greatest state.
David Aiken has our top story on another high-stakes meeting in the American capital.
Federal cabinet ministers Dominic LeBlanc and François-Philippe Champagne, along with Ontario Premier Doug Ford, headed to Washington hoping to get the U.S. to lift existing tariffs on Canadian imports and prevent any further tariffs. But they had barely cleared Canadian airspace when Donald Trump said he had no intention of backing down.
No, look, we've been ripped off for years, and we're not going to be ripped off anymore. No, I'm not going to bend at all. Aluminum or steel or cars. We're not going to bend.
And yet, 4 hours after Trump made those comments, Ford emerged from a meeting with Trump's Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, feeling encouraged.
We shared a tremendous amount of views back and forth, and I'm feeling very positive.
The meeting ran an hour and 45 minutes, and they'll do it all again next week.
We made sure that they understand that we're here to defend Canadian interests, that there's potential for a reset as well, where you have now a new prime minister that is going to be sworn in tomorrow.
Lutnick invited the Canadians to Washington Tuesday after Trump hit the roof when Ontario imposed a 25% export tariff on electricity it sells to about 1.5 million Americans. Ford paused those electricity tariffs and agreed to today's meeting. And while Ford said his meeting today with Lutnick was civil, Lutnick started the day on the Bloomberg television program Surveillance, slamming Canada and the EU for pushing back on Trump's tariffs, while Lutnick praised the United Kingdom and Mexico, who have, so far at least, not retaliated.
Europe and Canada do not respect Donald Trump and do not respect America's ability to build its steel and aluminum industry, which is vital for national security, whereas you watched Mexico and you watched the UK be pragmatic and thoughtful.
Trump, meanwhile, repeated the falsehood that the U.S. subsidizes Canada.
In the case of Canada, we're spending $200 billion a year to subsidize Canada.
The U.S., of course, has a trade deficit with Canada because it buys so much oil, lumber, manufactured products, and other goods from Canada. And that was a point the Canadian delegation was set to hammer home with Lutnick this afternoon. Donna?
Okay, David Aiken, thank you. BC's premier is mapping out his response to the trade war. He has tabled legislation to allow BC's government to cut red tape and regulations to take fast action against Trump's threats.
He has no regard for the chaos that he's causing, because we feel this is part of his strategy to hurt the Canadian economy and to force us into his vision of annexation to the United States of America.
BC intends to impose tolls on commercial vehicles carrying goods from Washington state to Alaska, and BC Hydro has banned Tesla products from its electric vehicle rebate program. President Trump's pick to be the next U.S. ambassador to Canada mostly stuck to diplomatic language during his Senate confirmation hearing today.
Would you agree that Canada is a sovereign state and should not be even jokingly referred to as the 51st state?
Thank you. Canada is a sovereign state, yes. How the president and the relationship between the former prime minister in Canada, the characteristics and nature of that relationship, I don't know.
The former congressman from Michigan steered clear of annexation talk. He said if confirmed as U.S. ambassador to Canada, his goal is to grow the business relationship between the two countries. Canadian and U.S. stocks continued their slide today. The TSX plunged to a 4-month low, and the Dow Jones was another 500 points down. The S&P 500 fell 1.4% today. The index is down more than 10% from its peak less than a month ago. The Nasdaq was down a further 2%. At this low point in Canada-U.S. relations, the American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, landed in Quebec for a meeting of G7 foreign ministers. As Taria Isri reports, peace and stability are on the agenda, and Canada's European allies are showing their support.
The G7 family photo. Behind the smiles, there's some family dysfunction. Internal tensions America's top diplomat did not want to discuss.
Mr. Rubio, is it appropriate for a G7 member to threaten the sovereignty of another G7 member?
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's trip to Charlevoix marks the highest level visit by the second Trump administration to this country.
Canada only works as a state.
Almost daily, Donald Trump repeats his threat to make Canada the 51st state. Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly did not address the annexation threat or tariffs in her opening remarks.
Peace and stability is on the top of our agenda.
Even if it's not on the official agenda, there's a lot of talk about the Trump administration's push to absorb its northern neighbor.
The answer is very clear. Canada will be Canada also in the future.
Germany's foreign minister is showing her support.
Especially in moments when your heart is really beating, it's important to keep a calm head.
We are actually wearing the Canadian colors for solidarity.
Despite the show of solidarity, countries have been careful about openly criticizing the U.S.
They're keeping their heads low because they're worried that you stick your head up over the parapet and it's apt to get shot off.
The U.S. has hit every country with steel and aluminum tariffs, including those in the G7, an organization made up of the world's leading democracies, which is also trying to find consensus on the war in Ukraine.
The Russian rejected the plan.
Canada holds the G7 presidency this year. The main event, which will be the Leader Summit, will be held this June in Kananaskis, Alberta. By then, Canada will have a new prime minister confronting Trump's threats in front of an international audience. Donna?
Taria Isri in Lamel Bay, Quebec. Thank you. And one last note about tariffs. Trump is demanding the EU rescind what he calls a nasty 50% tariff on American whiskey. If it doesn't, he says he will impose a 200% tariff on alcohol from EU countries. Liquor is among $40 billion worth of U.S. products being targeted by the EU in retaliation for those tariffs on steel and aluminum. On his final day as Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau posted a farewell message to Canadians.
I'm proud to have served a country full of people who stand up for what's right, rise to every occasion, and always have each other's backs. My only ask is that no matter what the world throws at us, you always be the same.
Trudeau will resign tomorrow morning, and Mark Carney will be sworn in as Prime Minister at Rideau Hall in Ottawa. Carney will also unveil his new cabinet at that ceremony. Russian President Vladimir Putin says the fighting must end in Ukraine, but whether the U.S. brokered ceasefire might actually happen is far from certain. Putin says there are issues that need to be discussed. Ukraine's president says Putin's response to the ceasefire proposal is manipulative. And President Trump, he said he hopes Russia will do the right thing. Both men say they want to talk. Redmond Shannon looks at where things stand.
Vladimir Putin is asked what the world has waited 2 days to find out. Will he accept the US-Ukraine 30-day ceasefire plan?
We agree with the proposals to cease hostilities.
A positive-sounding answer at first, but there are conditions.
This cessation should lead to long-term peace and would eliminate the original causes of this crisis.
Those causes include the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO, which the US now says is off the table. But there is also Putin's false claim Ukraine is led by neo-Nazis. He knows there is little prospect of a change in government in Ukraine in the near future.
Putin's maximalist demands in Ukraine have not changed. He wants to destroy Ukraine as a country, and he does not want it to become part of NATO and the European Union.
Then there is the timing of this peace proposal. Putin's troops are retaking much of the Russian land occupied by Ukraine since last year, an advantage he will want to press home. Putin visited the region Wednesday.
Who will figure out how and when the ceasefire is broken? These are many of the questions that need to be analyzed carefully.
Putin met with Washington's special envoy Thursday, and the Russian president says he is prepared to speak with his US counterpart directly.
No, he put out a very promising statement, but it wasn't complete. And yeah, I'd love to meet with him or talk to him. But we have to get it over with fast. You know, every day people are being killed.
Vladimir Zelensky called Putin's response predictable and said the Russian leader is just afraid to tell Trump directly that he wants to keep the war going. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Russia's war on Ukraine was one of the issues when NATO Secretary General met Trump at the White House today. Getting assurances for America's ongoing support for NATO was also on the agenda. And as Trump repeated his threats to annex Canada and Greenland, NATO's Secretary General, sitting right next to him, said nothing. Candace Cole reports.
President Trump's meeting with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte appeared to be one of mutual admiration, Trump boasting of his support for Rutte.
It's great to be with a friend of mine.
And Rutte praising Trump for the EU's $800 billion defense package to support Ukraine.
When you look at Trump 47,
It'll be hard to tell.
What happened the last couple of weeks is really staggering.
During their sit-down at the White House, Trump reiterated the need for a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine, vowed not to back down on tariffs against Canada, and when asked about his plans to annex Greenland.
Well, I think it'll happen. I'm sitting with a man that could be very instrumental.
Rutte says he'll stay out of the discussion of whether Greenland should join the U.S., but
when it comes to the high north and the Arctic, you are totally right. The Chinese are now using these routes. We know that the Russians are rearming. So there are 7 Arctic countries working together on this under U.S. leadership. It's very important to make sure that that region, that part of the world stays safe.
Trump has repeatedly mentioned taking over Greenland, citing security threats from China and Russia. However,
this will be illegal unless Greenland sort of provides, the green light to actually do that.
Greenland has already said it does not want to be part of the United States. An all-out takeover would be unprecedented because Greenland is part of Denmark, a NATO member. The same goes for Trump's talk of making Canada the 51st state.
It would essentially break up NATO because you can't trust the Americans. I think that has become very clear since the Trump administration has taken over. Legal treaties, international law, international principles, norms don't matter anymore.
Trump also did not rule out reestablishing his relationship with North Korea dictator Kim Jong-un. Donna?
Candace Cole, thank you. Protesters get inside Trump Tower in New York. Coming up, what they're demanding. Plus, calls to free a Canadian woman from a U.S. immigration detention center. About 100 people were arrested after they occupied the lobby of Trump Tower in New York City today. They're from a group called Jewish Voice for Peace. They're demanding the release of Palestinian activist and former Columbia University student Mahmoud Khalil. He is facing deportation from the U.S. despite having legal status in the country. The Trump administration alleges Khalil is a supporter of Hamas. The family and friends of a Vancouver woman are pleading for help after she was detained by U.S. immigration officers while trying to cross into the country from Mexico. As Neetu Garcha reports, Jasmine Mooney has been held for 10 days in what she says are brutal and inhumane conditions.
This is holy water.
This Canadian businesswoman, founder of a water health drink brand, is speaking out after being held in what her family calls inhumane conditions at an American detention center. She was arrested by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, on March 3rd after crossing the border between Mexico and San Diego. Speaking with ABC 10 News, she describes what happened.
I was reapplying for my work visa, and with no warning about what was about to happen, I was taken by ICE. They told me I was unprofessional because I didn't have the proper letterhead.
Her mother says she was held for 3 nights at the border before being transferred while handcuffed and in chains to a detention center in San Diego and later moved to a facility in Arizona.
I was put in a cell and I had to sleep on a mat with no blanket, no pillow, with an aluminum foil wrapped over my body like a dead body for 2.5 days. There are girls, women that have been in here for weeks, for months, and have not been told anything.
Mooney moved to LA in the summer of 2024, working on her business with a 3-year work visa, which she applied for successfully by entering the U.S. from Mexico. She was trying to do the same thing after her first visa was unexpectedly revoked in November. Lawyer Len Saunders does not represent her, but says he spoke with her a few weeks ago.
When she told me she was going there, I advised her not to, only because of the current political climate. She may be down there for a few more months minimum.
Global Affairs Canada says the government can't intervene in the entry or exit requirements of other countries.
What I am livid about is the length of time she's been in custody and the inhumane living conditions these women have been in.
The U.S. Department of Homeland Security says ICE has made more than 32,000 arrests since President Trump's inauguration, and its detention centers are at capacity. Legal experts say it's hard to understand why U.S. authorities would expend so many resources on a Canadian with no criminal record and no charges, leaving many wondering if they're making an example of people like Mooney to send a message. Nitu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver. Donatella Versace is stepping down as the creative director of the Italian fashion house Versace. After nearly 3 decades being in the top job at the luxury brand, the 69-year-old says she's giving it up. She took over after her brother and company founder Gianni Versace was murdered in Miami in 1997. Donatella will continue with the company in the role of chief brand ambassador. The announcement is fueling speculation Versace will be sold to rival Italian fashion brand Prada. Still ahead, what's being blamed for a sudden surge in measles cases in Ontario? It was 12 years ago today that Pope Francis was elected head of the Roman Catholic Church. To celebrate, the Vatican says the medical staff brought a cake with candles to the Pope's hospital room. Doctors say the latest chest X-ray shows the 88-year-old's condition is improving, though they warn his recovery from double pneumonia remains fragile. Pope Francis has not been seen in public since he was hospitalized nearly a month ago. Measles is on the rise in Ontario, mostly among unvaccinated people. Public health officials say the number of reported cases have more than doubled over the past 2 weeks, and since the end of February, 195 new cases have been reported. They're largely connected to an ongoing outbreak that began in October, which has now been linked to almost 400 cases. Last year, there were just 146 measles cases reported across the entire country. A new study suggests the time it takes the brain to recover from a sports-related concussion varies widely from person to person. Researchers at the University of Toronto and St. Michael's Hospital assessed the MRI scans of more than 100 athletes before and after they suffered mild brain trauma. Catherine Ward explains what they found and what it suggests about when athletes should be cleared to return to play.
When athletes get hit and brains are damaged,
the big question is, how long does it take for the brain to recover from these injuries?
New research adds to a growing body of evidence that long after people are cleared to return to play after a concussion, evidence of the injury can remain.
The heat maps here represent the effects of concussion on the brain.
Lead author Nathan Churchill was part of the team that followed 187 varsity athletes. Each had their brains scanned at the beginning of their athletic season and again if they got a concussion. For some, signs of the injury could be seen up to a year later when looking at MRI scans, even though they did not have symptoms.
We still saw decreases in blood flow. We saw signs of injury to brain tissue. We saw signs of inflammation.
Ravi Menon is a professor of medical biophysics at Western University in Ontario.
There is the concern that if you get another concussion, this could be additive or actually be something that puts you over the top for other future issues.
These experts say more study is needed to figure out if return to play guidelines require changing.
The rules that we have are based on symptoms. And what this paper and many others previously show is that the symptoms resolve before the physiologic changes in the brain. Now, whether that is important or not is something we still don't understand.
We want to get a better understanding going forwards of what are the cumulative effects and at what point does this new normal turn out to have negative consequences for the athletes.
Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
Another setback for 2 astronauts on the International Space Station. A European Space Agency probe is on a cosmic road trip and did a flyby of Mars, and it got within 1,000 kilometers of the Mars moon Deimos. That's Mars in the background. Scientists think the moon may be an asteroid captured in Mars's orbit or a chunk of the planet itself. NASA is going to try again to launch a mission to the International Space Station. A SpaceX rocket was set to blast off yesterday, but that was scrubbed at the last minute. It means 2 American astronauts are still waiting for a ride home. They went up for about a week and ended up staying there for 9 months. Though, as Heather Yurix-West explains, to say they are stranded is more fiction than fact.
We're coming up to get you. I've authorized Elon.
It's a story full of drama and heroics. 2 American astronauts stranded in space, set to be rescued at long last, thanks to the U.S. president and SpaceX founder Elon Musk.
You got to get them out.
Problem is, the pair doesn't actually need to be rescued at all.
Every day is interesting because we're up in space and it's a lot of fun.
Yes, Suni Williams and Butch Wilmore were originally scheduled to return to Earth last June. The pair traveled to the ISS on the Boeing Starliner, taking the new spacecraft on its first piloted test flight.
There were some issues during launch with some helium leaks and some thruster failures. So they weren't sure if it would be really safe for the astronauts to return back with the same system.
Not wanting to repeat a disaster like what happened with the Space Shuttle Columbia, when 7 astronauts were killed upon re-entry in 2003, NASA decided to bring Starliner back to Earth with nobody on board. Williams and Wilmore would join the mission of the next team of scientists scheduled to command the ISS, known as Crew 9.
If there really was an urgent situation, could they have used one of the capsules at the International Space Station to bring them home? Sure, they could have.
In the event of an emergency, there are always at least 2 spacecrafts at the ISS capable of bringing every astronaut home. But until now, there hasn't been a need. Instead, the pair will come home with the rest of Crew 9 this week.
Elon is going to go up and get him. Should I go on that journey just to be on the ship?
The SpaceX craft carrying not Musk or Trump, just the 4 astronauts of Crew 10. Heather Yurix-West, Global News, Calgary.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada showcases Sudbury, Ontario, Whitehorse, and Mr. PG in Prince George, BC. Keep them coming. Send your pictures of Canadian pride to globalnational@globalnews.ca. And thanks for watching. Jeff Semple will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I will see you again on Monday. Bye-bye.